now?
Yep.
Amazing. So, breaking the cycle, that's what we're here to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about survival mode and self-sacrifice, how they interlink, the energetics behind them, and the way that these patterns begin and become propelled in our life. And then also some tools and strategies around what we can do about them. Well, I'm not quite sure if you can see the chat box up here. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Mm. Oh, there we go. So here and now, I always like to open my spaces with an agreement because the work that we are doing is very vulnerable work. Our energy fields are quite open. I invite you, if you haven't already tonight, to just protect your energy, not from a sense of concern, but from inviting what is in alignment to resonate with us in this space. Because often when we're doing this energetic work, sometimes it can feel quite dense. It might be a little bit triggering. It might be a little bit emotionally evoking. And so just honoring the space that you need. If you do need to take a break, I completely understand that. If you need to leave the session and you want to follow it up on replay, I also understand that. Or if you wish to be present, like I said, with your video on or off, however feels most aligned for you in protecting your energy and protecting your space, moving through these transitional energies. I like to open my space by the agreement that we're honoring each individual's journey. Everyone's journey is going to look completely different. We're all unique. We're all coded in slightly different ways. We're all embodying different frequencies and moving through different parts of our journey and honoring different experiences that are a part of that journey. So I just like to open the space with the honor that we're going to honor each other's individual journey with open-mindedness and a judgment-free zone, allowing people to express themselves as they feel called through their journey, and just holding a safe space where we can fully just be ourselves. A lot of the spaces we enter in today's world come with conditioning and programming and obligation, and I want this to be a role-free space where we can just truly honor who we are and what we're feeling and moving through the frequencies as they are embodied through us. So tonight's session, we're going to explore the energetic and the neurosystematic patterns that keep us repeating cycles of self-sacrifice and survival mode. I'm just admitting a few more people now. Hello, welcome. Thank you so much if you've just joined us. We've just been setting the agreement of maintaining this as a safe and open space for everyone. We're just talking about tonight, we'll be exploring through awareness tools and shifting these cycles that are formed around self-worth, trust, and autonomous authority. I don't know if you can see me moving the video box around, but I'm just doing that so we can see the writing that is on the slides. Moving with remembrance this session. I say this because we come to Earth incarnate from our frequency, and I see human experience as a frequency channel. And when we move through incarnation into this portal of experience, we come with core remembrance, but those are the attributes that we encode in our soul contract to return to ourselves. And those core states are our sense of worth, our self-trust, and our self-authority. So when I talk about moving with remembrance, I'm talking about removing those things that we don't have to perform for, we don't have to earn, the states that we purely and simply are in being. If you think of a newborn baby, nobody expects a newborn baby to perform to be loved, or you think of a newborn baby, nobody expects them to fill obligation. They're purely loved for who they are, and they have this honored self-trust. Like, you see children trying new things. You ask a child what they want to be when they grow up. They honor that truth and that self-trust and that sense of authority over their own life to be who they want to be. And it's only through conditioning and programming that we disconnect from these codes. So tonight we'll be talking a lot about codes. And when I say codes, I mean the moments of energy and frequency channels. Welcome to those that are joining us now. Talking about those energy and frequency channels that allow us to connect with those innate states of frequency from our inherited frequency here, but in greater source energy as well. So I'm Brittany. I don't like terms and labels. I've never been a fan of labels. But if I was going to label myself for showing up purposes, I'm an energy analyst, alchemist, and channeler, mirror mentor. What does that mean? Basically, my work's mission is to support others in moving through shifting frequency, in a sense of identity. So we'll talk a lot about this in tonight's session, but essentially your identity is formed by the beliefs that you've associated with the experiences that you have. And there is a calling back to core state, like we just discussed, the innate frequencies that we are part of, our sense of worth and trust and authority. And what I do is I work with others to recognize the repeat patterns in their field and help them shift those patterns. So that might be moving through, like we're talking about tonight, self-sacrifice and survival, and how they're ingrained around self-trust and self-worth. And then the alchemy comes from turning all of our wounds and our lessons and our learnings into our light. Essentially, that's what I've done in my own, or I continue to do in my own experience, is through my own journey of self-development. I've built a space where I want to support others to also embody their own empowered state. Channeling comes from, so a lot of my work is either founded in self-research that I've done. I'm deeply interested in neurosystematic patterns, and I'm very interested in like mindset and all of those things. So I've done lots of research into like reports and things like that. But the other side of my work comes from pure channel. So if you do work one-on-one with me, you'd know, or if you are in my communities, I channel meditations. In my one-on-one sessions or my energy work sessions, I rely a lot on my channels in being able to like read the patterns and where they're coming from. And mirror mentor stems from, I don't like the term coach or guide or things like that, because I feel like it creates like this hierarchical system, and that's not how I see my work at all. I see very much that we are all equal humans living out this experience. What I do is reflect back to you that the patterns you're expressing to me and the energy that I am feeling, that that's coming from, the spaces that I'm recognizing those energy fields radiating from, and we work together with me honoring where you're at in your own journey. And a bit of my, I've rambled on for ages now, but a little bit of my backstory is my life's work has always been dedicated to enriching the lives of others. So I was a nurse for over a decade, and I left my nursing career to go full time in my soul's purpose and support others in their own life mission. So today we're going to talk about moving from our old cycles that no longer serve us: self-sabotage, self-sacrifice, people-pleasing, overthinking, fear, judgment, past wounds, and survival mode. Can any or all of us relate to experiences related to these themes?
Definitely.
Yeah. Is there something in particular for you, Kerry, that you feel?
Um, I think it's all relatable.
Yeah. Sometimes they intertwine quite a lot. And if anybody else would like to share if there's something in particular from that list they feel called to, or if you'd like to honor your own space and silence, I respect that at this time also. And moving into the new cycles that we're creating. So we're going to look at tonight what creates these cycles and what holds us in these cycles that we've just discussed. And we're going to then look at moving into those elements of self-trust, setting boundaries, alignment, confidence, inner peace, self-love, abundance, and freedom, which are very much related to those core states that we already discussed around our self-trust, our self-worth, and honoring our own authority. So, congratulations, you have completed the first step of breaking the cycle. You are here right now recognizing that there is a pattern in your life that is no longer of service to you, and you are honoring yourself by calling in further alignment by being present here. So, I just want to take a minute to honor and thank all of you for taking this moment for yourself, because everything we seek comes from within. And we can sign up to the sessions and we can use the tools and the practices and the rituals, and we can do all of the things. But what shifts, what moves the needle is our own intention. What truly is transformative is our own intention. Behind every tool is ourselves. Behind every space we show up to is ourself. Behind everything that we do, we're honoring ourselves. So thank you so much for being here tonight. And I honor that each and every one of you are holding space for yourself right now. And each and every one of you are taking honorary steps to your own alignment and your own evolution. And that is the first step. The first step is recognition, it's awareness, it's growing that awareness that something is no longer serving and realizing that there is more alignment beyond what you have been experiencing. So we're going to talk a little bit about the loop that we briefly discussed at the start, which is that if we continue to self-sacrifice, it will innately end up in survival mode, and survival mode will innately end up in a sense of depletion. And often we relate to that as like burnout, whether that's emotional burnout or health burnout or creative burnout, but it relates to a depletion. So essentially what happens is when we self-sacrifice for a long period of time, whether that's from conditioning, programming, belief systems. We're going to talk soon about all the different ways that we end up in this cycle of self-sacrifice or even self-abandonment, where we're just not honoring what is divinely in our alignment. And maybe that comes from a space of awareness. Maybe that comes from a space of what is familiar. It can come from lots of spaces. But if we're self-sacrificing or self-abandoning long enough, whether that's lacking boundaries, it's those people-pleasing attributes where you're showing up for others even when it's not of service for yourself, pouring from an empty cup. Or maybe it's self-sacrifice in performance. Maybe you have a really successful work and working environment, but perhaps you feel like you're trapped in this cycle of having to sacrifice something to earn something else. And it's this constant balance of to let go of one thing, you've got to be doing better or new in another space. So the self-sacrifice and abandonment can show up in so many ways. But essentially, once we've been self-sacrificing and abandoning, and we make that our familiar state, because our brains and our energetic field will keep us connected to what's familiar. So from a neuro section, we look at this as like the reticular activating system. So the reticular activating system is like your heat-seeking missile for affirming your beliefs. It's basically the part of your brain that tries to associate new experiences with old experiences, which continues the pattern and cycle. And energetically, this is the same in frequency channels. So your sense of identity and the patterns that are playing out due to those beliefs behind your identity will construct the frequency channel that you're in. And that frequency channel will then be what is mirrored back to you. So the universe will give you more of what you believe is familiar to you. And for long enough, this depletion builds and this self-abandonment builds where we burn out, we lose energy, the lack of joy, the lack of alignment, the lack of authenticity, the constriction turns us into survival, because we go from like this big bubble of energy, and then we take on all of the obligations and the roles and the opinions and the judgment and the stories and the beliefs. And as we condense our energy, so much so that we begin operating from a survival mode, from a space of just what needs to be done. We don't want to share our big dreams. We might not even have energy to. We move into that survival space where we can sometimes fall into what feels like robot mode, where we're just doing the motions, but there's no real heart or soul or energy being put into those emotions, like into those motions that we're taking, because we're just running on survival. And from running in survival for a long period of time, that constriction and that depletion continues. And that's what becomes burnout. That might be burnout creatively, might be burnout in your career, might be burnout physically. People who have experienced long bouts of dysregulation are more prone to things like autoimmune disease, because they've moved through these spaces energetically and neurologically in mindset through self-sacrifice into survival. And this has become their founding energy. And that brings them to burnout and depletion, because your system can only hold so much. And it's almost like you're allowing these things to be stacked in your field. And as you're constricting, your field is being filled with all of those external, with all that external noise, with the noise from your environment, the obligations, beliefs, and roles. And then that weight is what feels like depleting. And then we end up in that cycle sometimes where we either self-abandon more because we feel like, well, this is familiar, so it's what I know. And so it's our natural response to continue the cycle. Or sometimes we're so burnt out that it almost feels too much to change the cycle. Or the other common pattern that I'm seeing recently is that people are going into burnout and they're feeling like the load is less in others' energetic fields. So it feels easier to help others before helping themselves because expanding into their space means what feels like disservice to them for others. So now we're going to talk about, you can probably see on the left, there's a little question mark, which is what is continuing this cycle? What is continuing this cycle of self-sacrifice that turns into survival, that turns into depletion? And then we end up back at self-sacrifice because we're exhausted and we aren't holding capacity for that alignment, or sometimes it's even lack of clarity. If we have so much external noise and we can't honor and hear our internal guidance, then we kind of feel a little bit lost. It feels like that stormy moment where you don't know what decisions to make. What do you really want? And sometimes I see that show up in people that have self-sacrificed or self-abandoned in earning and proving and performing in their career. And then it turns into survival where their career might become something that they feel like they have to hold on to. And then from feeling like that is like their worth validation, they end up in burnout because they're just proving and providing. And then from proving and providing, they end up back in self-sacrifice. So we're going to talk now about what is that missing piece that's keeping us propelled. And what keeps us propelled is our belief system. So, like I mentioned at the start, our identity is constructed very heavily by our beliefs, and our beliefs are the stories that we trust and we have created about the events and experiences in our life and how we associate them with ourselves. This is a huge part of what keeps us in this cycle because it's the belief of how worthy we are. It's a belief of how much we trust ourselves. And it's a belief of where our authority comes from. What is our permission point? What is our acceptance point? But even beyond that, our beliefs are the root to the cycles playing out because our beliefs are the frequency channel we're operating from, not just with our sense of worth and not just with our sense of authority and trust, but we're also moving with our beliefs in every event that happens. So as we just talked about with like the reticular activating system and your frequency channel, and you're seeking out those familiar experiences, if your belief is that you can't hold money or that you're bad with money or that you're broke, then you will continue that cycle because your safety system energetically and in your nervous system won't feel safe to hold money. So then if you have a space where you get money, it won't feel safe to hold. You might spend it, you might self-sabotage that job offer or whatever. The other thing with beliefs is it can be so deeply subconscious in relationships where we're self-sacrificing, self-abandoning, people pleasing, because we end up in these cycles where we believe that our only worth is what we can give to others. And then there's obviously the external beliefs that we impress. So a lot of our belief systems are beliefs we've adopted or consumed from consumption around us, from the environment around us. So you might have a belief that it's selfish to not show up when somebody answers the phone. And so even if you're completely depleted and you've set a boundary that, okay, don't ring me after 7 p.m. because I don't have capacity to take calls after 7 p.m. I need my sleep. But you might feel selfish to take that time because what if that person needed you and what if it's important? And these belief systems keep us held in repeating those patterns because we believe that somebody else's energy, needs, desires are more important than our own. So, core state channeling, we talked about this a little bit. So, our beliefs they either channel us or disconnect us from our core state. Our core state being true self trust, honored self worth, and actioned authority. And when I say this, I mean trust as in internal guidance, as in surrender to faith. I mean worth as in wholeness without proof, without having to provide evidence, without having to prove, without having to validate, without having to externalize that energy for being worthy, not for what you do, but for who you truly are. an authority around our permission centers and the authority and gravitation over our life. This also links back into internal guidance and honoring our own inner compass as opposed to what is constructed in our external noise around expectations and obligations and roles. Moving through core state, we will always be gravitated back to honoring our core state. Our life patterns, not only our soul contracting, but our life patterns will propel us back to this. I often talk about this a lot, like the universe will send you signs, and first it will send you a feather, and then it will hit you with a car, and then it will run you over with a train, and then it will drop a plane on you. And what I mean by that is obviously not those physical events, but what I mean is that the universe will keep showing you that the pattern is not working, and it will amplify the intensity of the pattern so that you are called to do something about it, because that's not your innate state. It's the programming, it's the conditioning, it's all of these other external factors that have been imprinted on your energy field. And I do have another session which is available on School around human architecture, and we talk a lot in that about soul imprinting and soul contracts. And what I'm saying here is that from those components, you will always be called back to your core state, because it's never written in your soul contract that you're going to be unworthy in this frequency channel of human experience. It's not written in your soul contract that somebody else gets to tell you what to do. They're your core states of frequency being. And so you will always feel called and gravitated back to them. When we self-sacrifice, when we self-abandon, when we're stuck in survival mode patterns, we're disconnecting from these core state frequencies, because innately there is no lack, there's no limit on abundance. The universe doesn't say, okay, only this many humans can be abundant in this incarnation, or only this many humans can be worthy in this incarnation, because everything is so deeply interwoven and it's all moment by moment and experience by experience. And while we're moving through those experiences, there is no limitation on the abundance behind this experience, on the sense of authority. There's no limit on being able to create your own reality, no limit on your inner guidance. What we often find with inner guidance is that it struggles to come through where there's no space for it to be heard. What we often find with self-worth is it struggles to amplify through a space where we don't have self-trust. The reason self-trust and self-worth and even authority and trust are deeply connected is because if you don't trust yourself, then how can you tell yourself that you're worthy and expect yourself to believe it? If you don't trust yourself and you want to be the guide for your life, how can you guide? Like, imagine some stranger on the street giving you advice about what to do. If you don't trust them, how would you follow that direction? You know where they're going to lead you. There's our own sense of self-safety internally when we don't have trust. So deeply, these like are three main pillars of the core frequency, but trust definitely interweaves and interlocks them all, because without self-trust, we can't honor the other core states, because we're in a space of not being able to trust ourselves to hold them and have the capacity to hold them. So on the other hand, to the old patterns, talking about the self-sabotage, the sacrifice, the people-pleasing, the overthinking, and overthinking often comes from those senses of obligation and role and responsibility, and it can come from that pressure of the contradiction in our frequency where we're being called back to core state, but we're also deeply attached to the programming and conditioning that we've lived in because it's familiar, and that's what our brain and our frequency is seeking out, is what is familiar. Often overthinking is that space where we find ourselves, after an event, we're like, oh, I should have said this, or I should have done this, or I would do this differently next time, or if I had the confidence, I would have done X, Y, Z. And it's those overthinking patterns where we can sometimes attach to our thoughts, and attaching to our thoughts can create beliefs. So sometimes we will create evidence because that's what's familiar. So we might overthink a situation and think, you might go out for lunch with some friends and something might happen at the lunch, and you go to the bathroom and you come back and everyone goes quiet when you come back. And you might make that a belief about yourself. You might be like, oh, I believe that people don't like spending time with me. So they were obviously talking about me, and that's why they got quiet when they got back. And then it can spiral that overthinking pattern. And that overthinking pattern we can attach to emotionally, and we can attach our beliefs to, and then we can create beliefs around that. And then that might link into people pleasing. We think, okay, well, they don't like me because I was talking about how I've decided to go vegan and they don't want to go vegan. So maybe when I'm around them, I will I'll make sure that I get the extra food for them. And you've not even consulted with them if that is like a conflict for them. And then it comes to that self-sacrifice that, maybe you'll drive 40 minutes across town to go to the vegan shop before they come, when you don't have time, capacity, or energy, but you feel like you have to in order to keep them as your friends. Because if you don't do the things that are in alignment for them, then maybe they won't want to be your friend anymore, even though we're all uniquely different. And then we can self-sabotage, and we might think, well, my friends, they don't show up for me. I'm feeling like I'm like excluded. Maybe they're talking about me. And then subconsciously, because not everything is on a conscious level either. There's so many elements in the subconscious. And this is where we talk about like secondary gain. We're not going to go too much into that tonight. I do have other sessions around those if you're interested, but things like secondary gain start playing in because we get into this protective mode where it's easier to hold on to where we are because we feel like there's some sense of gain from that. So that might be holding on to a friendship that we know is not serving us because it feels better to have people around than to feel alone, because at the core we have a fear of being alone. So all of these things can definitely interlink together. Looking down the list, fear of judgment definitely would play into the example that I just used. Past wounds, it might be that those childhood wounds around the emotional capacity you felt you were met with as a child, the sense of worth you were met with as a child, if you were parentified, if you had experiences that made you question your self-worth or internal judgment. And these also build our internal dialogue. So when we are operating from these lower state frequencies, they also become not just beliefs, but they become wounds that we innately live out. It becomes a frequency that we're embodied in. And I talk about in the human architecture session how it's almost like imprints on our energetic field. And imprints are not just on the energetic field, but also on the energetic spaces of Earth, where we can experience wounds. And that might be that if you are born in a specific culture that might receive certain judgment in the country or city that you're in, these energetic imprints on Earth, these energetic channels that you move through in location can be so deeply triggering to your own frequency, even on a subconscious, just energetic level, even more so where we're still seeing those conflicts in the present day. And so these channels can also affect the frequency that we're moving with. And subconsciously, we can project ourselves into feeling like we have to people please or self-sacrifice by proving and earning because we already feel this innate lack that's imprinted there. And we've talked about survival mode and also how these come back to the belief systems that we attach to ourselves, because as we have these experiences, we create beliefs about the experiences. And those beliefs we create about the experiences continue to foster that sense of identity that we're holding. So essentially what happens is if we have low self-trust, then we're not going to trust ourselves to believe that we're worthy or to make the change, to make the shift. If you have low self-trust and you're trying to shift a pattern or a cycle, if you're trying to implement boundaries, whether that's relationships, work, if you have low self-trust and you're trying to shift a belief pattern, believe that you have a sense of worth after experiences that have made you question that. If you have low self-trust, it's going to be very hard to convince yourself of anything but the state that you're in. And you're going to even more so gravitate to that repeat pattern because you don't trust yourself to hold different. And it's almost like a capacity. If you think you're already loaded up with all of these stories and all of these beliefs, if you can't unload to trust yourself, you can't move in a different direction. It's like imagine having a GPS that's sitting on the home screen and you want to get to a certain destination. If there's no map up, then you're not going to go anywhere. And that's self-trust is that link between where you are and where you want to go, because you need the self-trust to be able to honor that change, to be able to honor your truth, to be able to honor your authenticity, to be that advocate of your authority, to honor your worth, You have to trust yourself to believe yourself that you are and have and operate from those states. And then from trust, we move into sense of worth. Like I just explained, if we're not trusting, we can't convince ourselves that we're worthy. We can't remember that we're worthy, because essentially we take on these external opinions and this external consumption of beliefs and stories and limitations, and we attach them to ourselves and our story and our identity, and we make them mean something about us. And when we make them mean something about us, we start beginning to question our own worth and what we need to do to earn that worth. And we start that cycle of external validation. That's what we go into here, is seeking that guidance and affirmation. So sometimes when we have low self-trust and we have low self-worth, what we often find ourselves looking for is validation, guidance, and affirmation. And that can be in many different things. It might be earning approval. It might be validating with self-sacrifice or people's perception of you. It might even be out externalizing your guidance. You might create those codependent relationships where you feel like you need somebody to tell you if you're making a step in the right direction, or you feel like you need approval or permission to be able to make a change. And that can play out in subconscious levels, that can play out in day-to-day life, where we're asking other people, oh, do you think I should do this thing? And internally, if you give yourself space, you already have some guidance on what feels aligned for you. But if you are operating from a space of low trust and low worth, you might feel a calling to, is that okay for a person like me to do that? And that comes from that belief identity, the beliefs that are creating your identity. Is that okay for me to do that thing? Well, it's like coming back to trusting yourself and your self-worth and honoring your core states. And then this moves to external validation and dependence. And that's where we can find ourselves in these cycles where we work really hard at work to prove that we aren't something, or we self-sacrifice to prove that we're a good person, or even these dependencies where we become fixated and attached on outcomes because we feel like we rely on those outcomes to prove and to earn and to reach that validation point to move forward with the cycle. But the more that we externalize, and this even happens in the spiritual community, I went through this period of time where I had had a dark night of the soul, and I was coming back into like recreating a new identity. And I found myself using every tool and every practice. I was trying everything under the sun, from crystal grids to rituals to all of the things, because I wanted to have some form of validation that I was like moving in the right direction. This was subconscious, and much later that I realized the pattern and the cycle. And this is why I honor so much my work now, that tools, practices, and rituals, amazing stuff. They do amplify energy, no doubt about that. But what is driven is your intention. You are behind everything. Like we spoke about at the start of this session, you are behind everything. Showing up to this session, that was you that chose to look and seek for alignment, not from outside, from within. Because I'm not telling you where that breakthrough is. You're receiving this energetic space, and that allows you to navigate what's within. And so sometimes we can find ourselves in these external dependencies where we rely on tools because, like, oh, well, if I don't have a vision board, that I'm not manifesting. But you are, because constantly energy is matched. Universal laws exist, whether you are honoring them for your most alignment or not. And so sometimes we externalize for this validation, we externalize this dependency, and it's just another sense of seeking guidance externally, seeking permission externally. If I have the vision board, that's my permission piece that I'm allowed to ask for those things. And that obviously comes then back to worth. Like, do I feel worthy of the things on my vision board? Do I trust myself to hold the things? Do I trust that I'm worthy for the things on my vision board? And that's how this cycle can play out in many different ways. On the other side, when we're looking at new cycles, when we foster that self-trust and we create that capacity and we create that honor, we create that space to hear ourselves and, to honor ourselves, we amplify our self-worth. Because if we trust ourselves, then we trust that there is a part of us that is worthy. And we can build upon that, creating further self-worth. And through setting boundaries and through honoring our trust, through moving with alignment, through the confidence loop, which creates confidence.
Mm.
So if you're familiar with that, it's a principle that the more you do something, like a cartwheel, the first time you do a cartwheel, you might not be very good at it, but the more that you do it, the more that you believe you can do it, the more that you actually can do it. And that's how confidence is fostered. So the more that we trust ourselves, the more that we believe our worth, and then the more that we move with these boundaries and these alignments and this conscious consumption, the more that we honor our worth through all of these things, the more that we create inner peace, the more that we honor our self-love. And these are the channels that we open up that allow us to access abundance, that allow us to access freedom in many different spaces. And from all of those principles, we move into that space of being able to honor our own inner guidance. So, where we create that space where we trust ourselves, we're worthy, and we're building those foundations of inner peace and abundance, we create a space where we can move with autonomous authority. And what I mean by that is that being able to return home and recognize that our guidance is always there. It's just having the space to hear it. It's that self-awareness to recognize what beliefs are serving you and what beliefs are not serving you, and to make from that space the decisions of what is in my alignment. So I like to think of my life not as like a step-by-step path. It's not like a play-by-play script. It's more like I have a vision. The universe honors that by sending me opportunities. With those opportunities, I can take each opportunity and ask, is this in alignment for the version of myself that I'm embodying, that I'm wanting to embody? And that's how we move through. And that's how we create a magnetic reality. We start shifting the self-worth and the self-trust, and this expands the channels of abundance and freedom. And that allows, because these opportunities, they're not just across. So I think of the human experience like a timeline grid. And if you imagine like a grid with all of your lines down and all of your lines across, it's not that one moment solely exists. It's that limitless potential exists. All of the outcomes already exist. You're just currently activated in this present moment. And so magnetic reality, it allows us, once we open these channels of self-trust, self-worth, and authority, to be able to tune into these other channels, the version of us that is setting boundaries. And you can channel that inner guidance from that version of you. I have a whole session on this on school around the timeline grids and identity shifting. And you can tune in to the version of you that has already set the boundaries and allow that guidance to be channeled from that point. You can channel from the point of the version of you who is already abundant in their relationships, in money, in roles, in anything, because abundance isn't just materialistic. It's not just money or resources. Abundance is in relationships, it's in self-trust, it's in self-worth, it's in frequency. There's so many different elements of that. And as we talked about, it like ripple affecting, that when we repeat these cycles of self-sacrifice or not trusting ourselves, and they amplify across our relationships and our roles and responsibilities through jobs and partnerships and parenting and all of those things, innately, when we activate these core states of self-trust and worth and authority, they also radiate across our life and across the opportunities of abundance and freedom. So what is shaping your reality? So we're going to talk a little bit now about the law of attraction and how the universe mirrors back to us the frequency state that we're in. So just to reaffirm that the energetic state that you are channeling from is the state built by your identity. Your identity is made up by your sense of self-trust, your sense of self-worth, your authority, but deeply your belief system. Your belief system is built from those experiences and events and the stories you've created about yourself tied to them. And sometimes this is the thing, is that we get into these patterns. Work is a really good example of this, where we get into a pattern where we feel like we have to overgive in our job, self-sacrifice, because we feel like that proves that we're a good person. But then we become attached to that story that we are only a good person if we're highly performing. And that can be in relationships as well. That's where people pleasing can definitely come from in aspects as well, is that we create this belief that we're only a good person when we do this. And the secondary gain is that we don't want to be a bad person for changing that dynamic. But are we truly a bad person for changing that dynamic? If changing that dynamic serves us, but it also serves them. We're going to talk about this a little bit later with the sovereignty section, in that if you are constantly adapting your approach to support the needs of your external environment or the obligations of your external environment, you essentially are carrying that weight for them. And not only is that extremely depleting to yourself, but it's also from a space that it doesn't allow them to access their full potential, because it becomes this very externalized system where over supporting creates their dependence on externalization, and their dependence on externalization creates your dependence on externalization, so that you're seeking the validation and they're seeking the support, and it becomes a codependency that actually self-sabotages for both of you. So what's shaping your reality? We're going to talk a little bit about the principles that we just talked about in are we operating from a state that brings us back to our core state of trusting ourselves, honoring ourselves, and being that authority in shifting the patterns? Or are we operating from a state where we're perhaps moving into a phase where we want to have that self-trust and that self-worth and that honor for our own alignment? Because essentially that's what boundaries are. Boundaries are the indicators to your alignment. So if you think about setting boundaries can be done backwards. And when I say it can be done backwards, what I mean is if you think about what holds your peace in a role responsibility relationship, what protects your peace in that space, and then work backwards from that. So that might be that it might be that setting a boundary is that you don't take phone calls after 7 p.m. because you need rest to be able to operate at your best potential. And so you might say, okay, what I need my rest. That's the goal. The goal is that I need rest. Coming backwards from that is like, okay, well, what can I implement that means I'm going to get my rest? Okay, if I go to bed at 7 p.m., that means that I'm going to get my rest. That means that goal's fulfilled. Okay, what boundaries can I set to ensure that I'm in bed at 7 o'clock? So that might be that you put your phone on do not disturb at 7 o'clock. That might be that you take a quiet hour from 6 to 7 to prepare yourself for bed if you know that you don't generally sleep well. And so then you can backpedal the steps. And then when someone says to you, oh, we're going for dinner at 8 o'clock tomorrow night, you can say, is this in my best alignment? No, it's not. And then you can set the boundary. I actually go to bed at 7 o'clock. That's not going to work for me. Maybe we can catch up XYZ time instead. So law of attraction. Where focus goes, energy flows. So if you are focused on the negatives, you will continue to experience the negatives. If you are focused on a particular pattern playing out, it will continue playing out. But this also happens on a subconscious level, where if you are in an energetic state of lack, where you don't believe that you trust yourself, you don't believe that you're worthy, feel like you have to earn that trust and earn that approval and earn that validation through roles, responsibilities, and obligations, then that frequency channel will be responded back to you and mirrored by the universe. And you will continue experiencing experiences like that. And as you feel emotionally evoked by those experiences, you will continue creating beliefs about that. And this can turn into that I'm not lovable, I'm not worthy, I'm only a good friend if I do XYZ, I'm only a good employee if I show up for XYZ. And we create these stories, and those stories continue to perpetuate those experiences in our reality. So we turn our stories into our identity. And what I mean by that is we embody the frequency of that story. If you believe that you're only a good friend when you're self-sacrificing, showing up every time that they need, regardless of your own needs, you will continue to create dynamics, whether it's in relationships, whether it's in your career, that amplifies that pattern. That's our frequency being mirrored back to us by the universe. But it's also our neurological system, like we talked about, the reticular activating system, which is seeking out familiar experiences to affirm those beliefs. The more evidence we have to affirm in a belief, the more weight that belief holds in our energetic field. So what do we do about that? As much as we can provide evidence to affirm a belief, we can provide evidence to change a belief. And so this is where not earning, but moving forth with self-trust is important. And from not a space of earning, but from a space of honor, because we are earning our self-trust. We are operating from a system that we are not trustworthy. So sometimes it takes the conscious and cautious alignment of the language that we're using. So not only do our beliefs become consumed, but our beliefs also often turn into our internal dialogue. So if we feel that we are judged, often our internal voice will mirror that judgment, and we will constantly internally judge ourselves through our internal dialogue. This is how those patterns sort of form. And then through that internal dialogue, we continually cement those beliefs, we continually radiate from that frequency, and that pulls more of those experiences into our reality. So where we can use conscious consumption in our environment, protecting our peace, creating our space, and we're going to talk about this soon, but where we create conscious alignment within ourselves and we recognize a belief, where that belief is coming from, what stories and emotions are tied to that belief, we can actually question, is this true? And when we say, is this true, we can project that. So the way I like to think about this, an example that I'll offer you, is that if you believe that you're not worthy for simply being who you are and that you have to prove to earn worth, then think of a newborn baby and ask yourself, is that true for every single human? Does every single human incarnated in this human frequency channel have to prove who they are in order to be worthy? Is it true for newborn babies? Is it true for your grandma who can't cook in the kitchen anymore because she's got her walking frame and she shows up to Christmas and she sits down? Is she not worthy of being at Christmas because she can't contribute to lunch and she can't make the salad and she can't wash up? Is it true, the belief that you hold, for every single human incarnated here currently? If the answer is no, then I invite you to consider what it is that makes you believe that belief is true for you. And this is how the cycle works. So essentially, we have a belief, and based on the beliefs that we hold ourselves, based on the beliefs we hold about ourselves, the internal dialogue we affirm that with, we will take action that is in alignment for that. We will take action that is aligned to the identity that we are assuming. If we assume an identity that says we have to earn and prove, we will take action that earns and proves. We'll do that extra task to prove that we're a good person, or to prove that we're a little bit worthy, or to get praise, to get validation, to get affirmation, maybe even to get guidance, to get those guides to the next step. And then from those beliefs and from the actions we've taken, we have an experience. And from that experience, we collect the data, we process the data. And what I mean by data collection and processing is that when we have an experience, we have that internal system that processes the experience. We attach emotions, express emotions. We create stories about the experience that we've had. And those stories about the experience are what amplifies the beliefs and the internal dialogue. From the data collection, we can choose to continue assuming the same story, or we can choose with conscious awareness where this story is coming from and what other possibilities exist across our timeline grid. What other versions could be activated from this story? And then we move into reflection. And moving into reflection is that space that I'm talking about now, where we can consciously choose a sacred pause to recognize what is or isn't in alignment for us. Is it of service of me to continue this pattern? Is it of service for me to continue this belief? Is this belief entirely true for every person incarnated at this time? Because essentially, like I spoke about at the beginning, human incarnation is a frequency that we channel into. There's many other frequencies we tap into while we're here, frequencies we operate from, frequencies we embody. That's where the self-worth, self-trust, authority comes in. Also from the belief systems, the stories that we're creating that make the identity. Our identity is our frequency channel. So you can choose to continue channeling that story. And when we continue to take these, because let's face it, and I talk about this in the human architecture session, some things are just simply out of our control. Not all experiences that we experience are 100% a mirrored energy reflection to us. Some shit things just happen in the human experience, but they don't happen for no reason. They invite us back to our core states. So, where we experience events that deeply impact our trust, worth, and authority, we can ask ourselves, by continually questioning our trust, continually questioning our worth, continually operating from a system of misalignment to earn back that trust, worth, validation, safety, security, whatever it is, we're outsourcing, we're giving our energy away. Not only has that situation made an energetic imprint on us, but the connection, the channel through that imprint continues to drain our energy, where we continue to operate from a lower frequency state. We have the choice to make that belief something different, to choose that regardless of that situation, that story doesn't have to mean anything about you. Getting fired from that job doesn't mean you're a bad person or a broke person. It means you had an experience. If you've gone bankrupt, it doesn't mean that you're bad with money or you are never, you're not somebody who can hold money. It means you had an experience. Our experiences are not who we are. They are part of our journey, but it's not our truth. Our truth is our core frequency states. And so when we have these events, whether it's a traumatic event or whether it's, and when I say traumatic event, I mean like across the spectrum. Obviously, there's like intense trauma. Obviously, there's like traumatic events like bankruptcy or losing your job for a period of time or family conflict or all of those things. That experience imprints on your energetic field. But you decide if that imprint is allowed an open channel to your continued energy, or whether you're going to close that channel and honor that that is just an experience and it is not a truth about who you are. And this is what I'm talking about through the reflection and the data collection and the way that we're moving that energy and honoring what is in alignment for us. So what does it mean to be worthy? Worthiness, self-trust, any of these adjectives that we prescribe through human dialect are not just states. They are frequency. Sure, worth is around our capacity to receive and to honor ourselves and our desires and our needs. But at the core state, worth is a frequency. It's an innate frequency that we incarnated with. Worthy for simply being. And so moving with worth is a frequency channel that we allow our abundance to channel through. And when we are disconnected from our sense of self-worth, we close that channel of abundance and we repeat the experiences that affirm that. When we move into self-worth through repetition, through cycling, because change doesn't happen with perfection. If that was the case, then it would be easy, right? Then we could all just do the thing all of the time and you could just flick a switch and it'd be done. I have clients say to me all the time, is there not just like a magic pill I can just take and then I wake up and I can just set the boundaries? It doesn't work like that. It's moving through that sense of identity. It's the identity you choose to create and the way that identity interweaves with the frequency that you're channeling into your reality. Worth is a frequency channel. To allow in abundance, you must believe you're worthy, must trust yourself, must honor your desires, must create stories that hold that belief and beliefs that create the experiences that you desire. So when we externalize our sense of self-worth, this can happen through many ways. Why do we do it? We're trying to prove, we're trying to activate through evidence, we're trying to externally seek some sort of validation or permission, performance, affirmation. We connect our worth with what we do, but it's not what we do. It's who we are. We're all worthy. Like I said, there's no limit. The universe doesn't say, okay, only this many people can be successful. Only this many people can be loved. We live in an infinite universe. Everyone can tap into unconditional love. Everyone can tap into abundance. But it's the beliefs we hold about ourselves that are the barriers between connecting to those channels. So we can move through externalization in many ways. We can externalize through validation. That's trying to prove ourselves. It's high performance. And a lot of these you'll notice interweave with each other. Validation is that seeking for somebody else to tell you that you're good, that you're right, that it's okay, that you're enough, that you're worthy. And often that's where people pleasing really comes in, where self-sacrifice really comes in. I say people pleasing again and again because it is really one of the most common forms of self-sacrifice that we do see. But it's that validation of wanting someone to honor your worth back to you, to mirror your worth back to you because you don't fully believe it in yourself yet. The other part of externalization with sense of worth is following. We live in a world that's very right field and left field and middle field in the current day. There's so many conditioning and programming and constructs that come with that, from the society that we grow up in, the culture that we grow up in, the family network that we grow up in, the social situations we're exposed to through school, uni, jobs, friendships, all of the above. And it can become really conflicting when we feel this inner calling for something different to what we are told is the path. Perhaps we've lived generations where, somebody has always sacrificed themselves to care for somebody else, and that's been honorary. And when we idolize and we honor self-sacrifice, we create these paths of following. We create these channels where we believe that the only way to receive the validation we just talked about is by following the same path that everyone else has walked. But just because everyone is traveling in that direction does not mean that is in alignment. Now, I'll offer this example to you. There was a study that was done where a man was asked to come into a room, and there was going to be whiteboards up, and on the whiteboards would be 4 lines, all of different heights. And all he had to do, as per the other participants, was select which was the highest line on the grid. Simple task, right? What he didn't know was that everyone else who attended that session was a paid actor who had been told to deliberately pick the wrong answer. And so, as humans, our innate instinct is to follow the crowd. We're pack animals. We want to fit in because that is a sense of safety and security. And so, we will adapt how we feel called to via our beliefs, via the beliefs we have about acceptance and safety and access to communities of acceptance. So, this man went in, and the first let of grids, it was so obvious. There was like 3 small lines and 1 massive line. He was like, easy, the answer's D. But everyone else picked a different answer. So then the next time he went in, he say it was like small line, big line, small line, small line. He was like, the answer's obviously B this time. But then everyone else had been told to pick D. And so he went in and he was like, oh, that's weird. Like, I was the only one again. Maybe I'm wrong. And he started questioning himself because of the environment he was being exposed to. And then they went in and they did it again. And say this time it was small line, big line, small line. So obviously the answer's C. But is it? What's everyone else thinking? Then he started to really question himself. So he hesitantly picked C to see that the others had all picked A. And then he really started to question himself. Maybe he was wrong. Everyone else was doing that thing. And this is what happens in society constructs and programming and conditioning, is we see the general mass moving in a certain way, in a certain structure, with certain beliefs, with certain identity attachments. And we think that that must be the way because it's what everyone's doing. So the last time he went in, it was small line, small line, small line, big line. And he was confused. Didn't know what to pick because he had trusted himself all of the other times and was considered wrong. And so he didn't know what to choose because he didn't want to be wrong again. And then fear and judgment started coming in. He was self-sacrificing his own internal guidance because of what the status quo outside of him was. But just because that was what he was exposed to didn't mean that was the only truth. Had they have brought in another participant who wasn't a paid actor, would have been just one more person that validated him and his experience. Maybe theirs would have been completely different again too, because it's very much not right or wrong. It's very much indifferent because our journeys are so unique. And that's why I invite you to question where you find yourself pondering along these beliefs that are keeping you ingrained in these cycles. Is this 100% true for everyone in the human experience? And if it's not, then why is it true for me? moving into the others that we have on the screen here now, self-sacrifice is very much that overgiving from an empty cup, or self-depleting from our self-depleting where we overgive to others. And often we find ourselves self-sacrificing to prove and to earn. And often with self-sacrifice and all of these externalized states, we find ourselves leading back to survival because we deplete ourselves. Often what I see is the association with self-sacrifice is one trying to oppose selfishness. We move with self-sacrifice where we are trying to so heavily accommodate in the other direction, not being selfish. Because it comes from lots of constructs and beliefs that being selfish is a bad thing. And I invite you, if that is your belief, to question that. I talk about that a lot in my sessions. Because to honor yourself is not selfish, because not only does it serve you, it's everybody else to tap into their highest potential too. If you are somebody who constantly evaluates where other people are at, whether that's whatever roles, responsibilities, whether it's personal, relationship, work, whatever role hat you're wearing, if you are considering where everybody else is at in their own journey and you're accommodating your presence to meet them without triggering them, without making them have to self-carry. If you are taking responsibility for where they are at, you're actually doing them a disservice. Not only are you disservicing yourself by overgiving, you're disservicing them by not allowing them to recognize their own state and to shift that. Because the only journey we are responsible for is our own. And I say that as a mum. I am a mum of 4 kids. And especially in parenting, we see these self-sacrifice cycles. I actually had a call with a client the other night. We were debating lightly the construct of selfishness. And she said, but as a mum, you can't be selfish. You've got to show up for the kids. They have needs. I said, yeah, sure. Being a mum, it does come with obligations. Like most roles do, right? Your job at work, it has obligations. If you're an entrepreneur, comes with obligations. But just because it comes with an obligation, don't get obligation and responsibility confused. Because yes, I chose to bring my children into this world, and I'm obliged to make sure that they're nurtured and fed and hydrated and have the needs met to the best of my ability. But I'm not responsible for who they turn out to be, because this is their own unique journey. And sometimes we can get that twisted. And especially the other thing I'll add in here is that people will meet you at the version of you that they know. So if you are receiving resistance from others for the changes that you are trying to make, that is because they don't see the version of you that you see. They don't see and connect with the version of the identity that you are moving into. They remember you as the last person they met. And so if they met you as somebody who self-sacrifices and abandons, they're going to continue meeting you as that version until they are forced basically to meet the new version of you. And either they will adapt or they won't. And this is where we talk about like conscious alignment in our environment. But this is where we see that self-sacrifice really playing in, is where we really start taking responsibility for where other people are at. And if we are taking responsibility for where other people are at, not only are we like filling our own energetic field, we're creating all of these cords and dependencies. We're not letting them stand in their full power either. And who are we to decide whether they get to embody their power or not? That's their field, their energy, their space to move within. The other thing we can often see is overcompensating. So overcompensating often looks like that high performative activity. It's overgiving, overdoing, the sense of earning. Maybe it's those extra hours at work. And maybe that comes from fear. Sometimes it often comes from fear that we worry that if we were to stop doing the extra hours at work, maybe then we wouldn't get our roster anymore. And if we didn't get our roster and we lost our job, what would that mean about us as a person? There's a pay into roles and relationships as well, where we find like, you might see this in a family pattern where they're like, oh, that's just Uncle John. You know, there's that one uncle, he comes to Christmas, he's rude, he's disrespectful, but everyone just disregards it as like, oh, that's Uncle John. So we just accept that. But you really got to question if that's in alignment for you. And why are you responsible to have your peace disrupted for the version of themselves they choose to be? Because you can only be responsible for yourself and your own peace. But you're overcompensating by allowing what you know is not in alignment for you to continue in your field because you feel like you maybe owe it to them, or you fear what would happen if you don't stay in that alignment. And there's lots of dynamics. All of these principles we're talking tonight are very individualized also. I try and take this as deep as I can as a collective, but there's so many attributes that are deeply linked to your own personal cycles. So this probably resonate very differently for each and every one of you. And there's probably some things that you connect to through different ways than the examples that I'm sharing. And there's probably some examples you connect to more than others. That's divinely and uniquely your own experience in where you're at. And the other externalization of our power is serving. It's that made like tendency where we feel like we have to pander to everyone else. And this plays into all of the other elements we've discussed here, especially self-sacrifice, where we feel like the validation comes from the perspective others hold of us. She's a good girl because she's quiet. She's helpful because she does everything for everyone else. When we honor the sacrifices somebody is making without recognizing whether that's in alignment or not, we create and perpetuate this cycle. And you are the center of your reality. We've spoken about this a lot. So it's up to you to recognize, is this in alignment for me? Because nobody's going to come along and say, oh, you're such a good girl for being quiet, but that's actually not serving you. Or maybe people will. Maybe there is people in your life who are sharing their light to expand your own. But you've got to recognize, okay, what am I doing here? And is this in alignment for me? And you can really tune into that by tuning into how you feel. Do you feel expansive in these spaces? Do you feel expansive in these experiences? Or do they feel constrictive? When you do that extra couple of hours at work, does that feel expansive? Does that light you up? Is that propelling you towards alignment? Or are you putting those extra hours into work and it's condensing you? It's making you feel this sense of proving, or this sense of exhaustion, this sense of, regret. Sometimes regret and frustration and resentment can be the biggest signs. And we often see, once we've lived out these cycles continuously, and this can happen generational levels, this can happen lineage levels, this can happen through many activations. We see where there's repeat cycles of self-sacrifice, of silencing, of abandonment, of all of these things, of externalizing our power. We see that resentment builds, frustration builds, regret builds, because we know it's not in alignment. That's our system calling us back to our core state, saying this isn't for you. This isn't your optimal operating state. This isn't how you best serve yourself and the reality that you move through. So where does worthiness come from then? If it's not coming from all of these external principles? And sometimes that's the secondary gain that we get hung up on, is that if I stop being the good girl to get that validation of she's good because she's silent, or she's a great worker because she does overtime, because aren't you still a great worker if you still fulfill the obligations of the role without exceeding them? But these are constructs and beliefs that we attach to from our environment and from our experiences and our stories about ourselves. Sometimes the secondary gain that keeps us repeating these cycles is the fear of the space without them. If nobody's telling you that you're good for what you're doing, nobody's creating that space of validation, then what is validating you? And space can be a very fear-invoking thing, because we worry that where we surrender one thing and we cannot guarantee the entry of another, we create fear. But we live in a limitless reality. So if you create space, that space will be filled. What it's filled with, dependent on your alignment in your frequency. So if we remove those external validators, we can self-validate. I have this tool that I absolutely love, which is creating a text chat with yourself. Whether you want to use it for manifesting your dreams, whether you want to use it for debriefing after a long day, a text chat with yourself I find is one of the easiestly implemented and practical tools to validate, because you can literally talk to yourself like your best friend. You can message yourself about anything. And we're going to talk about building trust strategies and things like that at the end. But if you are building self-trust and you are honoring your trust, you can text yourself about anything. You can text yourself, hey, babe, thanks for drinking that glass of water today. Hey, babe, loved how your hair looked today. Whatever your work, whatever space of your internal dialogue or your systems and your cycles you're working on, you can validate yourself by honoring what felt good for you. And it doesn't have to be in a text chat, can be in journaling, can be in mirror reflections. It can just be that internal dialogue. It doesn't have to be something you turn into a tool practice or externalization. Sometimes we end up with so many tools, practices, and externalizations that we end up back in the cycle of externalizing again. But just taking that sacred pause to honor the things, to honor how everything feels for you, but to honor those moments that were aligned, to honor that that was alignment for you and that you did that for you and you created and held that space for you. So where does worthiness come from? It comes from a sense of compassion, especially when we talk about these cycles of trauma and events. Like I said, the imprint is there, but the story you want to carry and whether you want to leave that channel open. If you leave that channel open, you keep living out that story that you created from that event, you are continually allowing the entity of that experience to imprint on your energy and drain your energy. You meet yourself with compassion, you can honor that it was difficult, you can honor it was not ideal, you can honor that it doesn't make a story about who you are. It was an event, not a truth. You meet ourselves with that compassion. You can also meet with compassion the versions of us up until now. So in the identity session that I have on school, I talk very much about honoring that sometimes we get stuck in hindsight. We think, oh, now that I know these things about myself, or now that I've changed these things in my life, why didn't I do that sooner? Why didn't I speak up for myself sooner? Why didn't I leave the job sooner? Why didn't I leave the relationship sooner? Why did I let that cycle just keep playing out? Honor yourself with compassion. You only knew what you knew in that moment. And that's like I was talking about on the timeline grid, where we are activated moment by moment and movement by movement. So you can only honor that the version of you that has carried you to where you are now did her best with what she knew and what she had, with the tools that she had, with the awareness that she had, with the capacity that she had, with the sense of self-trust, honor, respect, worth, authority. She did the best that she could to carry you here. Meet her with compassion. She did her best. And because she did her best, you evolve into these identities and through these identities, because I don't believe that identity is concrete. Our identities are very fluid. It's when we tune into those belief systems and we can rewire those identities through rewiring our beliefs. And that comes from self-trust. I know we've talked about self-trust a lot. Self-validating with self-trust is like the foundation. If you are building a house, you wouldn't build it on sand with no foundation. You wouldn't even build it on dirt with no foundation. You wouldn't just start laying bricks. You'd build the foundation to stack those bricks on. That's self-trust. Because if you don't trust yourself, then how on earth are you going to believe the compassion that you have for yourself? Then you end up back in this internal dialogue where you're like, oh, is that really true? Am I actually okay with myself for that? Was that really the best that I could do? And you cycle back. Same with honor. You can't honor your own direction, your own internal guidance if you don't trust yourself. Because you've got no tangibility, no connection to your own guidance. Can't honor that because you don't trust it. If you don't trust it, you're not listening to it. And then our self-respect, you also need trust. If you don't trust that you are innately worthy, you don't expand your capacity of worth and honor that channel, then there's no trust. If there's no trust, then you can't move with respecting your own decisions and respecting yourself for where you're at and honoring where you're moving from and to. And then there's truth. And if you think that you can express authentically without trust, I would love to have a conversation about that, because I have played this scenario in my head a million times over. And the one thing that I have recognized in every pattern is that you cannot move authentically without trust. Because if you don't trust yourself, you're not going to allow yourself to fully expand. And this becomes that space where is right if it's only right because it wasn't wrong. And what I mean by that is like coming back to that social conditioning of if your environment has constructed through programming and conditioning so many beliefs that you've formed into an identity, you're not going to trust yourself to step away from the status quo, to honor inner guidance, to even hear inner guidance if you don't trust yourself. Because if you don't trust yourself, you're going to keep shushing that version of you that's telling you for different. And sometimes that's the cycle that plays out is there's so much lacking self-trust that we can't express what we want because we don't trust, is that really what I want? Is what I really want to set that boundary that I know is going to cause conflict? Is that really what I want to move cities? And that comes back to authority and things as well, which is very much, that expression that identity is fluid. What we want is going to change. Expressing our truth is quite adaptable as well. We can move through different truths and different versions of us, but it's that trust. It's that trust in ourselves to honor all of these components: the compassion, the trust, the honor, the respect, the truth, worthiness, authority. So what is it actualized through? So we want to move with this sense of worth. We want to self-validate. What are we actually actualizing that through? What does that actually look like? What is actually the dynamic of us embodying that state of worth? We move with self-worth. We move with trust in our self-worth, with honoring our self-worth, we expand our receivership. So that's where people talk about to manifest, you have to be aligned with your desires. You have to be in the state of frequency that is worthy of receiving that thing. That's expanding the capacity of receivership. Worth and receivership are deeply interwoven because you will only allow yourself to receive and hold what you truly align with energetically as being worthy for. Very much based on the frequency channels and the belief systems we hold around the own capacity, because we self-limit. The only limitations in what we can achieve and obtain and move through is those beliefs that we hold. And fulfillment is another actualization of our self-worth. When we move with activated self-worth and we move from a channel where we truly honor that we are worthy, we allow ourselves to be fulfilled. We allow ourselves to have those enriching experiences. We allow ourselves to honor our truth. Through that, we reap fulfillment. Well, we believe we're worthy of joy. We believe we're worthy of abundance. We believe we're worthy of happiness. We believe we're worthy of positive environmental factors. We receive fulfillment because we're no longer externalizing. Because when you're externalizing your sense of worth, you're going to keep chasing it. You're going to need another ticket to the show. You're going to continually keep showing up to get the outcome that you're seeking, which is to be validated. But if you are self-validating, you're fulfilled because it's coming from within. It's radiating from within. It's a state of being. So you don't have to chase that. And chasing it's exhausting. That is the self-sacrifice that leads to survival because you're constantly chasing, constantly seeking through this externalized system. When you provide that validation to yourself, then you can stand in fulfillment. And the other actualized factor of being in self-worth is alignment. Like we talked about, when we truly believe we're worthy, then we can move with our truth. We can expand into our truth, not just from an energetic state of like, oh, now I believe I'm worthy of a new car or worthy of a new house or a new job or a better relationship or those things, but honoring the alignment of our frequency in moving through that honored self-worth as I'm worthy of listening to myself. I'm worthy of trusting myself. I'm worthy of making the decisions that feel aligned for me, even if they aren't in the direction that I believed was normal for so long. So when we talk about self-worth, sometimes what comes up is the question of what if what you need is different? So some people have these experiences of, oh, but I just feel like I'm way more emotional than everyone else. And so if I'm way more emotional than everyone else, then how are my emotions worth being held? Because not everyone's as emotional as me. What I offer you is the metaphor or the analogy that imagine you are a plant in the orchard. Imagine that you are one of the little cabbages over here in the garden, in the orchard, growing happily. What you need compared to these vines up here on the stake at the back, it's going to be different. Different amount of water, different amount of light, different stability. This needs a post. You're growing on your own. Might even need different soil conditions. You might need a deeper pot. They need a shallower pot. It's not that what you need is wrong. It's not that your worth is validated on fitting inside a box, because we are all in an orchard and we are all very different plants with very different needs. The most honorary thing we can do is return to that self-validation where we honor our needs for ourselves. We fill our own cup. I'm not talking about hyper independence where we overscale that and we self-sacrifice by eluding ourselves from all support structures. I'm talking about honoring ourselves and our space and the way we manage our peace through our boundaries, because your boundaries might look different to somebody else, and that might be what allows you to move through those emotions differently. So just recognizing that we are not all the same fruit coming from the same tree in the same garden. We're all sharing the orchard. We're flourishing at different rates in different ways, requiring different nourishment to look after ourselves, mind, body, and soul. So we don't need to ask for a map when we are the compass. And what I'm talking about here is that internal guidance that we've been talking about giving space to. Because if you're wanting to change a cycle, then what is sitting between recognizing your beliefs and what beliefs actually serve you is your own inner guidance. Not only are you being called back to internal state, but you're being guided by your own internal system from the soul breadcrumb. So I talk about this in the timeline session. We essentially leave our soul breadcrumbs along the soul contracting soul grid, where we evoke the journeys for ourselves. And there's many, like I said, big grid, many different points of activation versions of us that we can tune into, and different events and experiences move us through those differently for different experiences and learning, activations, remembrances, all of those things. But your internal compass will guide you. What I will say about internal compass is that it's very easy to confuse subconscious programming and internal compass. And when I say that, what really separates the two is how it makes you feel. Is it truly and honorarily expansive for you? Or is it a sacrifice or constrictive? Because subconscious programming will keep you repeating the patterns. So it will attach to the familiar. By attaching to the familiar, secondary gain will play in, self-sabotaging will play in, and these internal voices can feel like inner guidance. One of the most common forms of inner guidance that we talk about or honor in the feminine community is intuition. A little side tidbit of what I would add about intuition is it will have a distinctively different tone to your other internal dialogue. So for myself, my intuition is that like snap first response, that first thought, that download that comes from nowhere, much quieter than the loud noise that then comes in, the subconscious beliefs, the programming, self-sabotage, and secondary gain. They chime in, they're much louder, they're judgmental, they've got lots of opinions, lots of noise happening. Whereas intuition is very direct, very quiet. It's the first voice I hear very momentarily, and then the others will jump in on it. And through your own work, you can recognize distinguishing those voices. But your inner guidance can only express where it has space to be heard. Because you imagine you're at a nightclub with your friends, and the music's blaring and everyone's singing and dancing and there's feet tapping on the floor and the DJ is doing the DJ thing and there's bartenders shaking cocktail shakers. Your friend could be right next to you screaming at you, but if that environment is too loud, you're just not going to hear them. And so you've got to, it's the same concept. When you've got all this external noise in your field, beliefs, programming, conditioning, all of this, it's very hard to hear that internal guidance. Not that it's not there. So sometimes we confuse internal guidance and we think it's a channel that we've got to tune into. When you tune a radio, you don't have to create a station. You just tune in to the station, essentially our frequency. Like I said, we embody human frequency and then we have access to frequency channels from this channel. Essentially, you don't have to create the channel to connect. People say, oh, I want to learn to speak to my higher self, or I want to hear inner guidance, or, help me find my intuition. They're not lost. They don't have to be created. There's got to be space to be heard. So moving into talking about what we know. So we know, right? Like we know the cycles aren't serving us. We feel depleted. We feel constricted. We feel the weight of the cycle, like we said, that rising intensity that calls us to change. So if we know all of these, we know this isn't serving. If we know it, then why are we still doing it? Why is it that we say, I'm going to set the boundary? Next time that person speaks to me like that, I'm going to say X, Y, Z. Or next time my boss asks me to do double time on Friday, I'm going to say no. But then Friday comes and your boss says, oh, we're really desperate. Nobody else can do it. You're such a good worker. You're such a good girl when you always help out. Can you just do double time on Friday? And you think, oh, yeah. Then you propel the cycle and you're back in frustration, regret, resentment. Why do I do this? I'm beginning to regret your job. Oh, do I even want to do this job? Do I even like my job? All I do is overgive. And we perpetuate this cycle. And all of this is constructing those beliefs we hold about ourselves, the frequencies that we're operating from, perpetuating that cycle. If we know that, then why can't we just say no when our boss asks? Why can't we just remove ourselves from that relationship that doesn't serve? Why do we continue repeating? And this is what we've been talking about with the familiarity connections, the reticular activating system and mirrored frequency, the sense of identity, which is the beliefs that you hold about yourself that are keeping you tied to that cycle, that you're only good at your job if you show up for extra hours. The nervous system factor, so a huge section of our capacity in our human form is that we, especially in the spiritual community, it's often very much looked at like our energetic capacity. What do we believe we're worthy of? What are we opening ourselves up to in opportunities? How abundant do we believe the universe is? All of this energetic stuff. Amazing. Great stuff. I work with all of it to teach a lot of principles around it. But you are a human having a human experience. If you neglect the fact that you are in a human body, you are not going to have capacity. You can't vibe your way to capacity. You can't vibe your way to difference. Vibes have heaps to do with it. They are the energy we're immersing in, but they are not everything. You are in a human body. And if your physical capacity, and I say that in like mind and body, if your physical capacity is hasn't got space to hold new changes, because this is the thing, you can't have your energetic and your emotional, mental and physical field filled to capacity and then say, I want to change a cycle, because changing a cycle requires you to add new beliefs. You can't add new beliefs to an overloaded system. It doesn't work. It's like, if you're playing that game where you stack all the blocks on top of each other, if you just keep stacking the blocks and they're wobbly and all over the place, eventually it's just going to fall. You can only stack it so high. That's why we have architects to build buildings, is to make sure the foundations are in the right place. So then when we keep stacking it, it doesn't fall. There's no architect for misalignment. There's nobody making sure the pillars are there to make sure it doesn't fall down when you're out of alignment. You're stacking wobbly blocks and eventually it's going to fall. And that's why self-sacrifice turns into survival, turns into burnout. Rinse and repeat the cycle. So why do we repeat it? Because we don't have capacity for new beliefs. We don't have capacity for change, especially when we're in that burnout phase. So we've got to address where these beliefs are coming from. address where this is being stored in our energetic field and in our human bodies. And I talk about this through nervous system regulation. Nervous system regulation is like a ping word at the moment. If you're on social media, probably seeing like heaps of nervous system content. I know I have been, a lot of my clients have been. Nervous system is great, but there's two perspectives that I see heavily in content. And one is that you just need to address the root cause of why your nervous system was overloaded in the first place. And the second one is that you just need the tools to re-regulate it. I invite you to consider that it's actually both. Because if you can recognize what the core triggers were for your nervous system, great. Often what I find is people think they know what dysregulated their nervous system and where the pattern derives from. But when they start trying to implement strategies to regulate their nervous system, they will rabbit warren down the nervous system hole and realize that there is actually a lot more core beliefs and experiences that it ties to, because it's like an onion. As we start peeling back the layers, there's like a few more layers. I would invite you to consider it's both, because if you just target what initially triggered nervous system dysregulation, then you're only targeting the dysregulation point. But if you have been dysregulated for a long period of time, you have built a pattern of being dysregulated, and your familiar state is being dysregulated. So even if you target the trigger or the initial event or experience tied to your dysregulation, it doesn't change the fact that you have still lived in dysregulation for a very long time. So that is the adapted pattern you are functioning from. So it's both. You need to have awareness of where that's coming from, because our beliefs create our identities and our identity creates our frequency. So in order to shift that frequency, to shift those beliefs, you need to be able to recognize and implement new beliefs, but also target the regulation aspect, because you have lived in that state. And so that has become patented in your programming. And so it's also those regulation tools. So it's a little bit of both. And then safety and trust. So trusting ourselves. I know I've said this again and again and again. Self-trust is foundational. It is the cement slab that we build our bricks on. Self-trust, without it, you can't regulate your nervous system. You can't shift your identity. You can't change the cycle. Can't change it. But you've got to trust yourself to be able to hear yourself, to be able to honor what you're hearing from yourself. And that sense of safety is that sense of capacity and peace, and all of those interweavings around being able to question those beliefs and listen to that internal guidance. When we talk about conditioning and programming, so if you're still subjected to an environment that enforces your old beliefs, or you are continuing engagement in experiences or consuming content that aligns with an old identity, you will keep yourself in the I'm transitioning phase, the I'm healing, I'm growing, I'm getting better, I'm trying. You get stuck in the in-between instead of up until, I love the phrase up until now. All of my regular clients would know that. I love the phrase up until now because it draws a line in the sand. And I cannot tell you how many things that phrase has actively shifted in my life. For example, I have also run a cleaning business. When I started running my cleaning business, I had huge fear around my safety at work. And I kept repeating this cycle where I would get myself in this like anxiety state before work, because I was like, I don't know the clients, don't know where I'm going, like cleaning for new places and things. And I implemented this up until now phrase. And I in my voice chat, like I was talking about the self voice chat, I self chatted with myself about, I've been experiencing this sense of identity, of anxiety up until now. Up until now, I've had the identity that I'm not safe at work up until now. And I just made sure every place I could place in the sentence up until now, I did. And when I tell you, within 2 weeks, I was no longer experiencing anxiety before work. Gone. Because it's those attributes, it's the consistency in reprogramming that belief. We've got to have capacity, got to have safety to hold that capacity. And the conditioning and programming, when we're constantly exposed to those repeat events or experiences, then we continue attaching to that identity of ourselves, and that connection to that identity will keep amplifying that cycle, like I spoke about just a second ago with the I'm trying, I'm trusting, I'm doing. draw a line in the sand, and let it be definitive that that version of you served up until now. Now this version of you gets to carry the journey. And then obviously there's fear and uncertainty. I briefly spoke about before how creating space can feel very fear evoking and uncertain, because secondary gain chimes into the things that we might not have if we make these changes. And fear and uncertainty can play in through that secondary gain, through self-sabotage, but fear and uncertainty can also lie in unpredictability. So often where we're in cycles of high performance for earning and cycles like that, we can find a fear of what will be the story about me if that's not the story that I'm holding. And sometimes space in many factors can feel very uncertain. So, where is the cycle held? The cycle is held in our self-trust. We've talked about this time and time again. Our self-trust. If we don't trust ourselves, we can't shift the cycle. If we don't trust ourselves, we can't expand our capacity to shift the cycle. If we don't trust ourselves, we can't hear our inner guidance. If we don't trust ourselves, we haven't got the foundation to build the new cycles on. Where else is the cycle held? In our environment? And this is on so many levels. So obviously your consciously consumed environment, the things that you're consuming in your internal dialogue. So your internal environment, the way that you speak and the dialogue tone with yourself, but also the environment that you consume. So from everything from food has vibration, clothes has vibration, water has vibration, the relationships that you're in, the communities that you're in, the social structures that you're in, also the content you're consuming here right now in this session, in other online sessions on YouTube, on Instagram, on Facebook, the environment of your greater community, the city that you live in. This is where I was talking about like those energetic imprints that can be associated with like certain cultures and certain like groups of people in certain areas across the world. Environment is every part of external beingness and all of those attributes that we consume. And where else is the cycle held? In capacity? Like I just said, we are frequency experiencing itself in human form. So we have a human body to tend to. Mind, body, and soul have to have capacity in order for us to be able to shift these cycles, to be able to hold new beliefs, to be able to do this work. We have to have capacity on all three levels: mind, body, and soul. So what does capacity look like? Capacity is in our energetic field. So that's what I was talking about with when we remain these belief attachments to these stories we create around events that and experiences that we have. We allow those to imprint on our energetic field. Those imprints on our energetic field carry weight, and they also carry connective channels, which to the entity that was involved in the event or to the entity of the event, because each moment and experience holds its own entity of energy. All of those things interweave in your own energetic field. And that's why we talk about practices like cord cutting and all of those sorts of practices where we release those attachments and imprints to our energetic field. There's also people that work like in Akashic records and all of those sorts of things where they read the energetic imprints beyond this experience. Energetic field is also very much the safe space you hold for yourself. Where we're talking about externalizing into taking responsibility for others, it's where you begin to create those cross laps in energetic fields between yours and theirs, and these dependencies build. Also, capacity is in mindset. We've talked about this in that internal dialogue, in our perception of beliefs, whether they are true for us, why they are true for us, are they true for the collective. And then also, as we just mentioned, nervous system regulation. So not just targeting the wounds and events at the core of our dysregulation, but targeting the repetitious patterns with re-regulation strategies after long-term dysregulation. Then talking about our environment, we're talking about all of the factors. Like I said, environment is very diverse, many layers. It is everything in the external field that we consume from. and internally what we consume from also, where we draw that line between soul and body. It's the internal dialogue that we are speaking to ourselves with, the beliefs that we hold. It's that external environment, like we talked about with the social groups, roles, responsibilities, your location, friendships, all of those external factors, and frequency state. So environment is also a frequency state, like I was talking about, points of imprint activation on the earth, points of imprint activation on your own energetic field, because your own energetic field is its own environment. And then there is thus amplifiant fields beyond that that create the connections between you and your reality experience. Self-trust is honored through authenticity. We have talked about self-trust through and through. I honor and I will die on the hill that self-trust is the concrete foundation that we build our reality on. That self-trust is what is required for all shifts, transitions, whether that's expanding capacity. Any part of the transitionary journey relies on self-trust at some level. To honor our authenticity, to surrender to outcomes. When I say this, often in these performative cycles of self-sacrifice, we can find ourselves attached to the outcome. We're attached to the perception people have of us in that cycle. We're attached to the role that we hold. We're attached to the thing that that cycle allows us to access. Surrendering to the outcome. Know that you're worthy, know what's in your alignment, and trust that the path to your alignment is aligned for you, or that it's of service for you, because we didn't come here for a all high vibe trajectory. We see this promoted so often, like everyone high vibes, I'm high vibes all the time, no low vibe in my field. And I'm all for protective energy, conscious consumption. But you are in a human reality. And in human reality is duality and polarity. And through the duality and polarity is a requirement to surrender to the outcome, because things are not always going to be high vibe, and we can move away from them always being low vibe. It's finding that neutrality so that we aren't attaching our beliefs about ourselves to every experience. That shit things can happen and we're still worthy, we're still trusting ourselves, we're still on our path of alignment, and great things can happen. But maintaining that neutral field, that we are still worthy, we're still trusting ourselves, we still have that inner guidance to guide us in alignment. Because there will be ebbs and flows to life. So it's surrendering that we can trust ourselves, that it's for alignment, it's in alignment, and that not everything, not every experience has to be tied to a belief about ourselves or a story we create about ourselves. And then releasing the stories is what I'm talking about. We don't have to hold a story about every event we've experienced, that our ancestors have experienced, that is imprinted on our field, the space of the fields around us, on Earth's field, in this channel of human incarnation. Not everything has to be a story. We are the main character in our human reality, but we are not the main character of every event. Not every event is a defining truth of who we are and our identity, and thus creating our beliefs and the experience and the cycles that we live through. So I invite you to recognize that trust is the bridge between worthiness and creation. The more you trust yourself, the more life reflects your power back to you. And we're talking about those channels of mirrored energy, talking about those foundations of when you trust yourself, you reduce the limitations that you are imposing through the beliefs that create your identity. So the internal external loop, we've talked a little bit about this. This is that connection between yourself and your reality. So essentially what you feel, and we mentioned this earlier, what you feel on the inside will be what you project on the outside. What you receive on the outside, if you choose to make it a belief on your inside, will create the frequency inside. So this is where we were talking about, if you judge yourself a lot in your internal dialogue, you will experience judgmental events in your external world. And this is all linked into that self-trust and worth and authority. I won't go too much into this because we've spoken about this general concept a lot through the content here. And I am mindful that I do ramble a lot and I am now taking up a lot of time. Your inner voice is not missing. It's simply waiting for enough space beneath the noise to be heard. And we've talked about this, that creating capacity, because if you are already filled to the brim, then you can't change a pattern, because changing the pattern requires you to hold a new belief, and you can't hold something in hands that are already full. Sovereignty. So talking about being responsible without self-sacrificing. This is what I was talking about earlier with the art of taking accountability for what is yours. Your intention, your actions, your field, your frequency, but not attaching beliefs, obligations, and expectations from others to your space or from your space to theirs. Removing that link of performance that we have to prove to be worthy or to be valuable, because these come from a space of operating in lack. And when we move with alignment, we can honor that we only have to be responsible for ourselves. If we are moving with divine alignment, we can honor that we are integral, our actions are intentional, and we are assuming responsibility for ourselves, for managing our own energetic field, for managing our own beliefs and our own experiences without, like we were talking about earlier, trying to overcompensate by adjusting for what we think other people need, because then we start meddling in their energetic field and they can't move into their full potential either. And it creates these channels of dependency between ourselves and others. So talking about moving into that self-responsibility, when we hear that inner guidance and we create that safety trust net for ourselves, we honor that we are worthy for simply being. We don't need to attach all of these stories to every experience that we have, creating beliefs about ourselves. We can operate from an identity that honors that it is moving with alignment. And by moving with alignment, it is sharing the light. So the way I like to think of our evolutionary, and whether you want to call it an awakening or you want to call it spiritual breakthroughs or code acclamation or whatever you want to call these changing pivotal moments in our life, the way I like to think of it is that if you've got a torch and you are constantly running between rooms to try and light up everyone else's space, one, you're going to get really exhausted. Hello, self-sacrifice and burnout and survival. But two, your light's not very diverse. You're only filling up one space at a time. If you bring that light back to yourself in the center of the space, the light you're holding might just be bright enough for the other people to find their torches. And every other person that finds their torch and turns it on might just be bright enough to expand. And that is how collective consciousness moves through this reality, expands through this reality. When we take sovereignty, we take responsibility deeply to our own field. We make our responsibility ourself, our integrity, our intentional actions, our field, our frequency. We hold that light. And by holding that light steadily, we light more space than if we are constantly contemplating through others. So seeking an embodiment, not just knowing, but being. So this is the point where I often find a lot of people come for one-on-one coaching or group programs, is that they know the stuff. They know that they need to feel worthy. They know that the cycle's not serving and it needs to change. They know that it would serve them to have boundaries. They know it would serve them to change jobs, change relationships, move cities, have more balance, have more space, have more peace, earn more money. They know, but knowing and being are two very different things. And this is where we talk about acclimated embodiment. It's recognizing that what is holding you back through programming, secondary gain, self-sabotage, beliefs, experiences, perspectives, the environment you are consuming and continuing in, is that through diligent, intentional energy placement, you shift from knowing to being. Every time you ask yourself, was this expansive or was this constrictive? You allow yourself to recognize the gap between knowing and being. As you build your self-trust and you foster building new beliefs, you create the sense of being. That's why I love the phrase up until now, because it draws the line in the sand that says, I know that that wasn't serving, or I know that that no longer serves. I'm now choosing different. And we're going to talk in a second about how shifting cycles, it's not perfection, it's consistency. So we're making ripples, not waves. And I like to think of this like if you're in the water and you're splashing, it's very like there's lots of water moving like lots of directions. But if you're gently tapping and it's like rippled waves, it's in flow. It's not crashing, it's not destructing, it's not shifting directions like the rapids. If we are moving with ripples and not waves, then we are shifting it piece by piece. And why I say this is we talk about tools, but we want to talk about acclimating that and embodying that. Like we were just saying, moving from not just knowing, but to the sense of truly being. And through doing that, what we can often do, and like you hear this a lot in if any of you have had much to do with like the fitness world, where they're like, don't go from 0 to 100 too fast because all your habits will fall off, which is somewhat to a degree true. We know that statistically from psychological studies that it's something like I don't know the exact rates, but I know they're very high, that it's something like 70 or 60 something days to integrate a new habit, and there's like an 80 something percent chance of that habit falling off. This is why I talk a lot with my clients about like habit stacking and interweaving them. But what I also talk about is incremental change. We want to create ripples, not waves. So when we're integrating new tools, affirmations, when we are closing the gap between up until now what was and what we are moving to embody, we want to change at a believable rate. And I'm talking about self-trust again here. I mean it when I say I truly believe this is like the foundational concrete, is that if you're currently sitting in a money mindset that says I'm broke, or I'll always not have money, or money just doesn't come to me, or I'm just not a financially blessed person. And then you start chanting in your affirmations every day, I'm a billionaire, I feel safe with 20 gazillion dollars in my bank account. Your safety system is going to chime with your nervous system, your energetic frequency system, is all going to chime in mind, body, and soul level and be like, do we actually believe this? Because there's a massive gap between where you were in one identity, where a one identity has carried you to, and where a one identity is moving forward from. And if the gap between the identity up until now and the identity moving forward is huge, it leaves this space, just like that social experiment we were talking about, where the more that the person felt like what they were doing was different, they felt resistance in themselves to follow their own intuition. It will be exactly the same with your own shifts. If you're trying to create this huge distance between what has carried you up until now and what is moving you forward from here, it's very wobbly in trying to cement that self-trust. So what I invite you to do is to move incrementally, and not from like a space of like, oh, you have to move slowly, because some people, they might use tools or they might integrate, you know, different identities in a short period, some longer. It's very individual. Like our journeys are very individual. It depends where you're coming from, what it is that you're changing, how rooted that cycle is, how expanded that is into your entire reality. But by creating incremental, it's not to say, oh, you have to do this for this long, or, whatever, because time doesn't exist. It's tangible, it's frequency based, it's what you are currently embodying. So it's building that self-trust and building that momentum by creating what feels like safe and true, honest authenticity. So it's using those tools and those affirmations to move forward with alignment, but creating ripples, not waves. So talking about tools and practices, I spoke about this a little bit at the start. They're great, but don't forget it's coming from you. Everything you create is coming from within, is found within. Your reality is expressed as the mirror from what is within. Just remember that you are the source. Everything you're seeking is already inside you, including with your tools and practices. The affirmations don't make the change. Your belief system, your internal frequency does. The crystal gridding, the vision board, all of those things, fantastic. They amplify the energy, but guess where that energy is coming from? It's coming from within. So tools to shift. I've got a few little tools here I thought I would just quickly share. This is greatly what other sessions are focused on. Every session I do have on school has follow-ups with it. So all of the sessions over on school have like affirmations and journal prompts that intertwine with those themes with them. They also have integrative meditations, and some of them have tools. A lot of the work that I do one-on-one is recognizing the patterns with you and being able to move together in creating tools that support your shifts. But here's a few that I find commonly and consistently supportive. So self-trust is evidence-based. Our programming system is evidence-based. We receive data, we analyze it, we create a story about said data, and that's how we create our beliefs and our identity and our frequency state. So consistently following through on the evidence. So when we're building self-trust, we want to be looking at things like keeping our promises to ourselves. And this is why I was saying ripples, not waves. If you say, the next time my boss asks me to do overtime, I'm going to say, no, I'm never doing overtime again. Maybe it's like incremental. Maybe it's like, I can only do. It's honoring your space, what you have capacity for. Okay, I do overtime, but I only have capacity for an hour. So that's the boundary that I'm going to draw. And maybe over time it's refining like what is in alignment for you, listening to that internal guidance and taking that deeper. But creating self-trust, like we've talked about, self-trust is the pillar, it's the foundation. So creating self-trust, and I just want to acknowledge that we have gone the 2 hours now. So if anybody does need to head off, I do honor that and I do respect your time. You're welcome to catch up with the replay or send me a message, but I will continue the session for those of you that are available to stay committed at this time. And I do thank you for your presence. Self-trust is foundational. So we want to create evidence. Something I like to do with clients when we're really beginning with the self-trust foundations is create those affirmations of self-trust and evidence in any way that you can. And so your brain is not selective in what data has to provide the proof. It's just selective in proof being provided. So take the opportunities in small steps. Make promises to yourself that you know you can keep them, and then honor yourself for keeping them. Validate yourself for keeping them. I'm going to drink 1 glass of water today. If you're not drinking at least 1 glass of water, then that's probably concerning. So it's something simple that you can say, like, I'm going to drink 1 glass of water every day. And then you can build that self-trust because you've followed through. Whatever way is in alignment for you to move, ripples, not waves. Capacity is sacred space and peace protection. To create capacity, you need to be intentional with your energetic field on all levels, the internal level, external level. And this comes in like so many factors and layers. But you're going to naturally navigate into familiar states. You want to create a space where the familiar state is grounded regulation. That's why we talk a lot about like the nervous system, attributes and supporting yourself, mind, body, and soul, mindset with the belief systems, your energetic system with where we're placing energy and holding energy and frequency, and nervous system in that body and how we're integrating that. And then environment, which is regulating with conscious consumption. So there's lots of factors to our environment. We talked about this, lots of layers in our environment that we are exposing ourselves to and we are consuming. What creates conscious consumption is creating boundaries of what you will allow yourself to consume and expose yourself to. And you can start this in many different ways. It might be refining the content that you watch. Maybe you do an overhaul on your Instagram followers and ask yourself what truly feels expansive and what truly feels constrictive, and move through transitioning more alignment into that space. It might be your physical environment. So coming back to capacity, you can kind of interweave these into each other. And so environment might be like from a capacity and environment perspective, looking at nervous system, bright lights in the evening produce higher levels of cortisol. So that's going to decrease your capacity because you are being loaded with cortisol chemicals, which essentially are stress hormones or activation hormones in your body, creating awakeness states, creating hyper awareness. And so it might be environment, might be reducing to lamplight in the evening or red lights in the evening, and that supports your environment physically, but your environment also internally in your capacity and your nervous system. And there's the transitionary tools. So these are just some like basic principles around like founding themes in creating transition, and that's self-awareness. So that recognizing beliefs, where they're coming from, what stories we're creating that we're turning into beliefs, or what stories we have already turned into beliefs, and what identity those beliefs are creating and holding. Immersion, transitionary, the immersion tool in transition is like the spaces that you put yourself in. So the putting yourself in spaces with supportive people. So finding an online community of like-minded people affirms the belief that the trajectory you're on isn't wrong. It's just different. You're finding your community. So that immersion effect. Affirmations we talked about, affirmations are those like verbal, written confirmations that we affirm to ourselves, the words that we use and associate with the transition, affirming what we want to create in our reality. So that might be, I am happy and healthy and strong, whatever's like aligned in your space at that time. Visualization is insane. I mean, all of the tools are insanely powerful because they're coming from you, and you are insanely powerful. Visualization is great. It's that it's like immersion intertwined with affirmation, intertwined with mind, body, and soul nourishment, because visualization touches on so many aspects of our field, from internal operation, from mind, body, and soul. It acclimates the sensations of the experiences we're moving towards. It acclimates the sensations of the experience, the environment. It acclimates the visuals. Like it's just on so many levels. When you're visualizing something, your body's not only just touched with sensation, it's touched with emotion, it's touched with many different elements of exposure. And then transitionary tools of nourishment. So it's like we were talking about with environment and capacity and trust. It's just nourishing your mind, body, and soul with beliefs that are serving, with frequencies that are aligned, and with boundaries and peace protecting and sacred space holding. And that can be so many different things. It might be somatic movement like yoga or breath work. It can be, yeah, journaling. It can be a hot bath. It can be the food that you eat, the water that you drink. It can be the self-affirmation, those internal conversations and dialogue as well. So consistency over perfection. This is what I was mentioning earlier, in that inner guidance isn't found, it's heard. Often we just need to create space for it to be heard. When we are making changes, we don't have to get it perfect. You don't have to hold the boundary perfect every time. You don't have to, like, whatever you're implementing, if you're creating money safety or you're working to financial freedom, you don't have to get the savings goal every single week. You've got to be consistent. And why consistency works is because it's intentional. Intention is the frequency. So the more you embody that frequency through intention, through consistency, the more you amplify that, and the more that becomes the operating state. Whereas when we focus on perfection, we often get ourselves in these cycles where if we don't get it perfect, we don't do the thing we said exactly how we said we were going to do it every single time, then we continue creating this sense of distrust, and the sense of distrust then impacts our sense of worthiness and authority and all of the other elements we've talked about tonight. Whereas consistency means showing up with intention, even if you don't get it 100% right, even if it's not exactly how you envisioned it every time, surrendering to that outcome, but being consistent with the intentional placement of your energy. So, thank you all so much for sitting through tonight's session and being here with me. Thank you if you've had the time to stay on now. I've been honored to hold this space for all of you and to connect with all of you. I do apologize if any of you have commented in the chat and I haven't seen that because it hasn't come through while I have been screen sharing, but I will be back to the chat in just a minute and I will have a look and see there. I offer if anybody would like to unmute or turn their video back on at this time. And